Hey, Rin-senpai here after quite a long time, but now I'm back and I wanted to talk about Asuka's unique cancels, how it affects its frame data, and how you can use this to your advantage. But before we get into that, a big thank you to all the people on Dustloop for compiling the frame data. I did some testing myself, of course, but this video would have taken so much longer if not for all the great people there. So thank you for that. And if you want to look up frame data bots drive, do check out Dustloop. I will put a link in the description down below. I'm not gonna spend any time explaining how Asuka's mechanics work, since if you're here for frame data, I assume you already know that. In this video I'm trying to answer the questions about Asuka's frame data around his cancels. Which cancels give me the best frame advantage? With some spells is it better to not cancel at all? How many frames do I lose if I decide so anyway? Of course I could have just made a sheet, but instead I'm just gonna teach you how to do it yourself. Asuka has so many different cancels and variations he can do that I think a sheet would just confuse most people instead of actually helping. So teaching you how to do it yourself means that you can figure out any combination of specials you might wanna cancel and how their frame advantage is. But don't worry, for those who don't like math and numbers, I still do have some sheets to give you a general idea on how good his spells are on block, with and without all of his cancels. First off, let's go over all of our specials and see how much total duration they have. This will help us find out which ones are great for gaining frame advantage, or at least not lose as much, and for which we might need a spell with a higher block stun to stay safe. Starting off with our best special cancel option, which is also one of Asuka's supers, Bookmark Full Order. Its total duration is only 17 frames, but it costs meters, so we don't always have access to it. But if we do have the tension, cancelling into it is really our best option to minimize recovery and maximize frame advantage. So, but our best meter-less options would be charge mana and discarding with bookmark. Both have a total duration of 25 frames. There is no real difference between the versions of charge mana outside of if you want to use resources to recharge more mana. But in terms of frame advantage, they are all the same. Discarding with bookmark is not something you will use often, but mana management is very important with Asuka, so it's very convenient that charge mana is also our best meterless option to minimize recovery. Next up we have drawing with bookmark and change test case at 28 frames of total duration. Since Asuka not only has to manage his mana but also his bookmarks, it is very nice that both of them don't take that long. Bookmark can even be cancelled further, but sadly this data is missing on Dustloop. Yeah, I did it for you. So these were all of Asuka's main specials. All that's left are his spells that are not dealing any damage. Since I haven't listed them so far, you can imagine that they all have more recovery than his resource recovering specials. But to complete the list, I still wanna mention them. At 29 frames we have most of his spells actually. There are the chaotic option, Sampler 404, and most of the mana or bookmark spells. It's probably easier to remember. Anything that I won't mention later will have a total duration of 29 frames. Only one frame more, at 30 frames we have all of his stats. Doesn't matter which effect, they all have the exact same frame data. Next up is his teleport at 35 frames. And last but not least, we have the mana and the bookmark buff from test case 3, auto import and continuous mana regeneration at 39 frames. With this list we now know our best cancel options. There's no secret spell that has such a low total duration to make our spells more plus than ever. Really, his resource recovering spells are the best ones to cancel into. Now that we know this, we have to look at Asuka's actual projectile spells, his Metrons. So now we only need 2 more things to find out the frame advantage after cancelling. We need to find out how much frame advantage the Metrons have without cancelling them, and then how much of their recovery can actually be cancelled. Luckily, both of those information are on Dustloop. Here is the frame advantage, and all of this is what can be replaced with one of our specials. Before we proceed, I want to mention 2 things. If a Metron can be affected by one of the staffs, the Accelerate staff will add not only Guard Crush but also 11 frames of block stun to any given Metron. For simplicity's sake, I will completely ignore this staff, but if you want to know, basically you can do every calculation, just add 11 frames at the end, and then you know the frame advantage with this staff. The second thing I want to mention is that the delayed Howling Metron, the Thunder Metron, is listed as plus 22 frames on block. This isn't wrong or anything, but at point blank the last hit of the Thunder Metron might whiff. In this case it is only plus 11 frames on block. It happened quite often to me, so I felt like I should mention that. So keep this in mind. But now let's go over one example of how to calculate now our frame advantage. We have all the information we need, and it's pretty simple really. All you have to do is take your frame advantage of the Metron, add the recovery that can be cancelled, and then subtract from that the duration of the special you're cancelling into. It's really that simple. Let's try this with the Howling Metron, the Water Metron. Looking at Dustloop, we can see it is plus 5 on block. And if we count all these frames, we know that there are 25 frames of recovery that can be replaced by any special of our choice. So if we now do the math for, let's say, Charge Mana, we get plus 5. So in this case, no change at all. But that also means that there is no disadvantage of cancelling into Charge Mana. If we try it out, practice shows that we were right. True String into P is still possible, and we are able to counter hit a throw attempt with 2k. If on the other hand we try to bookmark a new spell, we now get plus 2. So compared to not cancelling or cancelling into Charge Mana, we lose 3 frames. We still have frame advantage, so it's not all too bad, but now our 2P can easily be thrown and we trade with 3 frame normals. This illustrates that you have to structure your offense differently depending on what you want to cancel into. So instead of using our dash cancel to be as close as possible, we could create some distance instead. Now, in this string, we are out of reach for Soul's 5k, and our 2k can beat it despite being only plus 2 and 2k being 6 frames. It doesn't matter if the opponent actually knows the matchup or not, they might try to challenge you regardless. They might challenge you actually a lot more if they don't know the matchup. So it's important to know which strings are actually tight and which not, and this changes depending on what you cancel into. So, but this was only for the Water Metron. What about the others? Well, the cancelable recovery is sadly not listed as a number, so if you want to know the frames for any of the other spells, you will have to count them. Or not, because I did it for you. And here are Asuka's non-Metron spells. But what if you want to know which Metrons lose advantage and which don't, without being as crazy as me and remembering all those numbers? To put it simply, I would group Asuka's spells into 3 categories. Those you can basically always cancel into Charge Mana or Bookmark without losing any advantage for either of them. Those you should at least always cancel into charge mana, where you won't lose any advantage or even gain some, but you will lose some when you cancel into bookmark, and those where you will lose frame advantage no matter what, except maybe with bookmark full order. In the first group we have the delayed howling Metron, which I will call the Thunder Metron, and the Howling Metron MS Processing, which I will just call the Wind Metron for short. Both of them have 30 frames of cancelable recovery, so that is more than enough to cover for bookmark. They even have enough to cancel into the staffs without losing any of their frame advantage. Next up in group 2 we have the Water Metron, which we already went over. Then Metron Arpeggio, which I just call the Portal Metron. The Terra Metron, which is just the low. And the Accipiter Metron, which is the high. And of course RMS Boost Metron, which I just call Page Metron. Those you should definitely at the very least cancel into charge mana, but keep in mind, as I mentioned before, cancelling into bookmark will make you lose some frame advantage. The one exception here is the Page Metron. I wouldn't really worry too much about it, because it has 27 frames of cancelable recovery, which is only 1 frame less than bookmark. And it is already without cancels plus 25 on block. So plus 24, I think this is more than enough in most cases. So, and in the last group, the Metrons that will always lose some frame advantage, we have Metron Screamer 808, or Screamer for short. The delayed TARDIS Metron, or Elemental Metron, how I like to call it. And last but not least, Bit Shift Metron, or the Fire Metron. I think the Screamer Metron stands out here the most because it also causes a guard crush, so you would naturally assume, oh, this Metron is really good on block. But in the end, you lose quite a bit of frame advantage, even when cancelling into charge mana. Don't get me wrong, it's not like you're being suddenly negative. After all, even when cancelling into bookmark, you're plus enough to true string a close slash. But you overall still have less frame advantage than many other Metrons provide. This can be especially noticeable in neutral, since it's a big hitbox, so you might wanna throw it out there. And if you don't cancel into anything, it actually has very little recovery, so it is kinda hard to whiff-pun it. But as soon as you try to replenish some resources, it gets a lot easier to do so. So keep that in mind when you use the Metron Screamer. It is pretty good, but you really lose the advantage of having low recovery as soon as you decide to cancel into something. The Elemental Metron also might come as a surprise for many because it has so much frame advantage, but you do in fact lose a lot when you cancel into something. It's just that it has so much in the first place that you can do basically whatever anyway. The only real setup I found where this matters is if they block it. You can actually jump and then true string a high-low afterwards. As soon as you cancel afterwards though, you don't have enough block stun anymore to true string. This is not an issue if you set it up on Oki, because the Elemental Metron will hit later, therefore making up for the loss. But if you do that in block string, this is really the only thing I've found where this matters. Otherwise, just cancel whatever. Similar story for the Fire Metron. At level 1 or 2 you might feel the frame loss, but level 3 to 5 it has so much that you can really cancel into anything and still be more than plus enough to just do what you want. And in our surprise group 4 we have the DP Metron, Aquila Metron, which is the only Metron that can't be cancelled at all, so you're stuck at minus 25. So this was all nice and well, but what about cancelling into multiple specials? So far we only talked about cancelling into one and mainly into bookmark and charge mana. So let's say you don't want to know with which Metrons you lose or gain some frame advantage, but you want to know which Metrons allow you to still stay plus at all after you cancel into 2 or multiple specials. Let's say into Bookmark and Charge Mana, which Metrons allow you to still stay plus. First, we gonna find out the cancelable recovery of our specials. In this case, Bookmark. Those are 12 frames and we subtract those from its total duration. We do this with every special that we cancel, but in this example it's only this one. And then add the total duration of our last special, which is Charged Mana. This gives us a new total duration for all of our specials. Now, which ones are still leaving us plus after all of this? If we look at our formula, we notice that there are 2 main components to look at. First, of course, the total duration of the specials we cancel into. And those are gonna be subtracted from what is basically the frame advantage without cancelling and the cancelable recovery. So as long as this part is more than this part, we're gonna be plus. Which means it's time for a new sheet. Here is how many frames each Metron gives you to work with. Now in our example we got 41 frames of total duration that need to be covered. And as we can see, those are the ones that provide us with enough frame advantage and cancelable recovery to make us still plus after cancelling into both of those. So with all of the lists and examples and sheets I gave you, you should be able to figure out any combination of special cancelled and how much frame advantage Asuka has after each of those. And even if you don't want to calculate all of this list can still help you understand which Metrons give you the most frame advantage and where you can get away with the most amount of cancels. But if you want to make sure you understood everything correctly, here's a little test for you. Here I'm taking my turn and I want to set up my staff. I notice I have the Thunder Metron, which is very good in block strings, so I know I can get away with also bookmarking a new spell on top of setting up my staff. But in which order should I do that? Should I first set up the staff, then bookmark? Or rather first bookmarking and then setting up the staff? Which order leaves me more advantageous on block? Well, have fun figuring it out. But that's it from me now. I hope everything was understandable, but if there are any more questions or if I even missed something, let me know in the comments down below. And with that, goodbye and see you next time. So, for those who want the answer to the small question I asked earlier, in the first string we cancel the staff into bookmark, so we have the 30 frames total duration of the staff, minus the 11 frames of cancelable recovery, and add to that the total duration of bookmark, and we get 47 frames. In the second string it's the other way around, 28 frames of bookmark, minus 12 frames of cancelable recovery, and adding the 30 frames from the staff, and we get 46 frames. So the correct answer is first cancel into bookmark, then into the staff. When doing it that way, after the Thunder Metron we are plus 6, which means close slash beats throw attempts, and 2k can be true string to be safe from DP. Unlike with the other order in which we are plus 5, which is still not bad at all. But now our close slash can be thrown, and we have no true string into a low anymore. I hope you got it right, and bye bye.